thinking about, oh, good. I love thinking about sustainability, Judaism, um, social justice, tikkun olam, all of those different elements just mean a lot to me. And I'm just excited, and I want to acknowledge Sherry for her prompting me to do this presentation. So thank you, Sherry, for that encouragement. As I told some of the people who were on right at 7, that this was a heartstringer because my son was about to pitch and I had to leave his Little League game to be here. So that says how much all of this means to me, that I would leave him while he was pitching. Today, 1 hour and 16 minutes ago, I had a near-death experience 21 years ago. It was quite extraordinary. We didn't know it at the time. I went through several near-death experiences, but I was in California, and it turns out, we didn't know till many months later, that I had swallowed a toothpick that was hidden inside a sandwich that punctured my iliac artery, and I was literally bleeding to death internally, and no x-rays and no nothing could show what was actually happening. And if you read the surgical records of what took place, it's sort of beyond belief because they had no idea. So I will just say that I am having a near-death experience is one of the most wonderful things in the world, and I wouldn't want someone to have that experience. I wouldn't want you to have to go through that to have that experience of appreciating each breath and being able to be alive. And I really feel that in this particular case, I was going to get on a plane and I fainted at the airport. And if I had gotten on the plane, I had no pulse or blood pressure, I would have died. And but that wasn't the near-death experience. That came at 4 o'clock Pacific time. I was in the ICU and I hit the call button and nobody came. And I could see the nurse, but the door was closed. And I hit it again and nobody came. And finally, with all the last strength I had before I was literally leaving, I pressed it, squeezed it so hard it actually shattered. And the next thing was I was looking down as 10 doctors and nurses came in, and I could hear each and every one of them and feel every single thing that each one did to me. It was quite extraordinary. So I am just incredibly grateful to be able to be here. And I really thank God that I am here. And all of those doctors and nurses who really helped me through a series of what became near-death experiences. And so for me, what we're going to talk about tonight is not a little thing. I had the privilege in 1980 and 81 of getting to travel around the world and write about organic and sustainable agriculture to try to answer the question, is it possible that we could feed everybody on the planet without destroying it in the process? And in the course of that, 2 things happened. One is I went to 45 countries and over a year and a half, and I got the answer, which is yes. That we have the possibility of literally turning things around on the planet. And the other thing that happened was I had my very first near-death experience, and that was in Sri Lanka. And I really got 3 messages from God, and they have been central to my life ever since. And the first is that my body is a temple, and I need to purify it. The second is that my purpose is to serve God, people, animals, the earth. And last, we have very little time to turn things around. And so that's the context that I want to bring to you, because the reason I really wanted to do this is to help support each of you in helping to be able to bring that about. I co-founded, after that traveling around the world, a nonprofit that was called the International Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture, now called the Alliance for Sustainability. And we work in a number of different areas, but primarily to bring about a fundamental shift, to bring about sustainability, health, equity, and kindness in the world. And when we talk about sustainability, we've had a definition we've used for almost 40 years. It was one of the first definitions of sustainability, and that is being ecologically sound, economically viable, socially just, and humane. Humane is a great word, means to embody our highest values. So how we treat people, animals, and the earth. And so that's really what our work has been about. And we have, one of the things that we did is we created something called Congregations Caring for Creation, with all different congregations throughout the state of Minnesota, all different faith traditions. And that has now evolved into Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, which we're really delighted about, and the great work that Minnesota IPL has been doing over the years. So, and maybe just one more introductory thing that I'll say is that my rabbi growing up, I was just so blessed. He was really one of the three great Reform rabbis of the 20th century, Rabbi Arnold Jacob Wolf of blessed memory. And really quite extraordinary, the first rabbi to come out publicly and call for a creation of a two-state solution of a Palestinian homeland, and first Holocaust studies, first Jewish camping, just a number of things that, and he saved the life of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He and several other rabbis brought Heschel, helped Heschel escape from Germany and brought him to the United States. And so he's had a profound impact on me, where he would bring Jesse Jackson to come speak, Reverend Martin Luther King to come speak. We were very active on many different levels. So for me, Judaism was really about social justice, not as much about the environment. I didn't know as much about that. And it was only later that I became more aware about all of the teachings that we're going to talk about tonight. So any questions before we begin with any of that? Does that all make sense? Okay. Maybe one thing I did want to ask at the very beginning, any overall thoughts that came to anybody? Because I'd like to make this interactive. Anything that you read that really struck you, or a new thought, an aha moment that came to you from any one of the readings? I'm just curious if they were helpful. Brian already said that how much he appreciated them, but any specific thing that, like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that, or that's really cool? Because I like to sort of hear what came up for you guys if you had a chance to read. And if you didn't, that's fine, because we're going to talk about them. But anything that struck anyone?
Well, something that I have to, it's more of a question. How we go about measuring and issuing an opinion about whether an organization or a process has met the standards. We would like to see some kind of symbol or find some kind of easy way of knowing whether something complies with our values and aspirations. And that's a difficult thing.
That's a great question, Brian. There are many certifications that are out there for all different kinds of things. Certified organic is one of the biggest of all the certifications. And I was just attending the Natural Products Expo. It gets about 30,000 people from all over the world. And this is the place where all of your new natural products come from, and where they promote them and have people know. And organic is just off the charts in terms of its growth. It has been that way. It's the fastest growing area of the supermarket industry, along with plant-based vegan food. Those two areas are experiencing just extraordinary growth, while much of the industry is actually losing. Those segments are actually gaining significantly, double-digit growth every year. So that's one certification. When I shared two things with you, two articles, which we can talk about maybe more at the end, but there's a Heckscher that's been developed by the conservative movement. And there's also an attempt, and I won't say how strong it is, but an attempt by many of us in the Jewish renewal movement to develop this concept of eco-kosher, of eco-kashrut. I won't say that that is as far along. So I don't think that there's any great one. And the Heckscher, the Magen, I'm trying to remember the name, but that Heckscher isn't as inclusive as I would like. So I don't think we have really the one that I would really like to see. There are many critiques I have of the organic certification. I was involved in as the North American representative to the international body that did North American certification did certification globally. And so there are a lot of challenges. So there's not one that I think is really the perfect one. There's a lot of effort on regenerative organic, and you'll see more, humane, and a number of them. So I don't think that there's really a good one. So I don't know if that's the answer for you.
Well, it's an opportunity for progress. And just as a general comment, this is a very difficult problem for a lot of social practices. And in my field of accounting and auditing, trying to establish an assurance for privacy proved to be almost impossible.
Yeah, it's tricky. And the other thing that I have to say about organic is certified organic means there has to be a whole accounting trail going right back to the field by box, whatever that produce is, whatever that food item is. And, there's a lot of challenges in being able to have a good system like that. There are some very good systems of voluntary reporting, like the series principles, and they're very good. And there's some other ones, but they're more about the company, not about a specific product that you would buy. So that's where we are. How about other questions or comments that just initial things, and then I'll get into the rest. I just want to see if anything else came up for people. Anybody else? Yeah, Julie.
I work in the world of Musar, which is a Jewish practice of living your values. And I was thinking about the importance of incorporating some new midot, and one of them being something around sustainability or eco-consciousness, that it's not just the value, but it's also the actions that we take in the world. So this conversation and topic has got me thinking about modern midot, and certainly the importance of having some that are related to our impact and responsibilities with the planet.
Thank you, Julie. That's beautiful. First, I call Julie the mother of Musar, and she has been bringing all of her incredible gifts to our whole Twin Cities and national community by sharing her take from all of her studies and all of her teachings, which are really quite extraordinary, but has been bringing it to our congregations. And it's just such a huge gift. And so I think that where we're going to start tonight will be a perfect place for thinking about exactly that midot and what that might embody. And just as you said it, and even right now as I'm saying it, I'm getting chills down my body thinking about that as a possibility, because the first one we're going to talk about, Baltashit, it's huge. It is so big and so much bigger than most of us that were ever taught. I never knew about it growing up. And the more I've studied it, the more it is totally mind-blowing. So any other last ones before we jump in? All right, I'm gonna, Sherry, if I can do a screen share, I'm gonna pull up my first piece, and we'll get it here. Here we go. All right. I'm not gonna be able to see you guys very well right now because I want to make sure I can see the full screen. So this is the first piece that I had shared with you. What does Judaism teach about Tikkun Olam? And you can see, I don't think we need to dwell too much given people's background about where the concept of Tikkun Olam comes from. But it's a mystical concept. And I think that's beautiful. I think that that's really quite powerful about how do we heal, how do we create space and make room for creation and with this divine light that's here. And so there's a whole lot that we could say about it, but I'm not going to focus on that tonight. And the second one that I do want to mention is about sustainability. And the truth is that sustainability is a new word. It's only been around 40 something years. As I said, the Alliance was one of the first groups to develop the definition of it. But every different spiritual tradition has great teachings about caring for all of creation. And we may share a few of those as we get into this further. But I'm just really, I did not know that. I had been doing sustainability work and I had not gotten the depth of Judaism's commitment to addressing sustainability. And it is really quite profound. And as I mentioned, what the definition is, it's got these 4 parts, almost like a chair that you sit on, being ecologically sound, economically viable, socially just, and humane. And it does have this great values component about our highest values. And there are a lot of approaches for being able to get at what sustainability is that you probably have heard of, like regeneration and resilience, circular economy, permaculture, many others, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I think really one of my favorite teachings is that God, when God created Adam, God led Adam around the Garden of Eden and said to Adam, "Behold my works, see how beautiful they are, how excellent. All that I have created for your sake did I create it. See to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it afterwards." I just think that that is really so profound a teaching. And, you know, in other words, we are the ones that are responsible for caring for creation. And that's our responsibility. And if we screw it up, there's no Superman or Superwoman that's going to come and save us. So it's really on our shoulders. And I know it was mentioned earlier about sacredness. And I personally believe that everything on our planet, all of it, is sacred. It's an incredible gift from God, and that we are all the children of God. And I think we really need to shift our perspective about how we see ourselves, how we see our relationship to this sacred world that we are in. And in Genesis, it talks about that we have dominion over fish, fowl, cattle, and all the earth. But Jewish oral law has been very, very specific that it is never allowed this to be a pretext for exploitation. And I can't overstate how important that is, because, and I don't want to be mean about it, but in Christian theology, that dominion is meant to be really exploitation. And Judaism has never seen it that way. And I think that that's just important. So any questions about those concepts so far?
Terry, I would have to disagree with you. There were only some Christian theologies that took the dominion as exploitation.
Okay.
And many Christian teachers over the years have used the word stewardship, which is very close to what the Jewish word actually says.
No, I think that's very true, but most of that is reclaiming.
Yeah.
That is because the church really had very strong position about exploitation. And many of the people that you're referring to, who I love, have really had to fight. And they've actually called for an 11th commandment, which is to actually reverse that understanding very explicitly. But I appreciate that. You're right, Sia, that there
Yeah.
are great people who've been calling for that.
I-
And, you know,
how-
and to be honest, there's some Jews who don't always see it as holy and sacred and do exploit it. So, you know, I'm not just trying to point at that, but I'm just really wanting to underscore the significance of our, whenever we're engaged in a conversation with people, that we really make sure that Judaism has never permitted that as an acceptable understanding that we can exploit the planet. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute.
It's understandable that the idea of exploitation could be derived from Genesis chapter 1. But Genesis chapter 2, which is an alternative creation story, directly speaks about the stewardship of the garden. And, and the creation of Adam and Eve occurs through a very different process in chapter 2.
Yeah.
And we might derive some interesting insights from that.
Yeah, great point, Brian. Appreciate it. Any other comment, question?
I'm just struck by the 4 different aspects of the definition of sustainability and how, to me, they correspond with each of the 4 worlds.
Yes. You know, I love that, Julie. And it's something that I've thought about too. And done a little presentation on at the Aleph Kala, you know, talking about those 4. But I love that. Thanks.
I missed what are these 4 worlds again?
Julie, you want to explain?
Sure. It's the world of the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. And that things happen in all 4 worlds simultaneously. So when I looked at the definition of ecologically sound, to me, that was on the earth, that was physical. Economically viable was the intellectual, the socially just and humane was the emotional, and embodying the highest values is the spiritual. And so in that way, I saw it being connected as a 4 worlds approach to sustainability.
I think we need to do an article on that, Julie.
Okay.
So if there are no more comments or questions on that, this is the one that really moves. Well, I'm glad you like that, Julie. But the one that really shook me was this one, Baltashit. This is on its face pretty, I don't know, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, that, you know, if all of this is so sacred, then we don't get to just destroy it. You know, that's sort of pretty elemental, I think. And I'm just gonna try to get my screen smaller so I can see there. Sorry. The first and the foremost of the prescriptions when we think about the environment in the Torah is, when in your war against a city, you have to besiege it. You must not destroy it. Its fruit-bearing trees. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. So this is really the beginning of this concept in Judaism called Baltashit, and or do not destroy. And this is really a very ancient and sweeping series of all kinds of Jewish environmental regulations. And they forbid everything from overgrazing and destruction of cultivated plant varieties to the waste of resources and pollution of air and water. I mean, really, if you're Jewish and you care about the environment, it doesn't get much better than that. It is pretty profound. And the idea is that this is God's creation, and we are responsible for caring for that. So it's very cool, and that's just sort of on this elemental level. And then it gets into really practical environmental examples. Carcasses, cemeteries, tanneries have to be kept a certain distance from a town, from the air pollution. A tannery can only be set up on the east side of a town because the east wind is gentle and will not carry the fumes into town. Well, you may pollute other areas, so that's not so great, but at least they recognize the significance of that. And we're going to go down, but now it gets more interesting. Now it goes deeper. It's broadened in rabbinic law to include any gratuitous act of destruction, not only one who cuts down food trees, but also one who purposely and impulsively smashes household goods, tears clothes, demolishes a building, stops up a spring, or destroys food, violates the command, you must not destroy. That is pretty radical. That is pretty huge. And I'm telling you, I used to love The Who, and I was totally into the guitar smashing. And then as I thought about it, I said, what a waste. What a horrible thing to do, to destroy a guitar. I mean, it's just, and so it's really helped me think in much deeper ways. And here we're going to go deeper. Baltashi even prohibits the destruction of something that can be useful to others. So you should not be trained to be destructive. When you bury a person, do not waste garments by burying them in the grave. Give them to the poor, then to the worms and moths. And then anyone who buries the dead in an expensive garment violates the negative command of Baltashi. That's incredible. That is just totally amazing to me. And now we go on to the last level, and then I'll be interested in any comments, questions. There's also this mystical level of Baltashi. All creation reflects God's will, so it has to be regarded reverently. And Israel's first chief rabbi, Abraham Yitzhak Kook, who I love studying. He's a vegan. He was a vegan. He was totally big environmentalist, deeply spiritual. So he said he always took great care not to pluck, unless it were for some benefit, anything that could grow. For there was no plant below that did not have its mazel, literally its constellation, but also understood as guardian angel above. And then he says, everything that grows says something. Every stone whispers some secret. All creation sings. And to me, in answer to your question, Julie, there it is. I mean, that is just so profound, so deep about how we see things. And maybe I'll just add one last thing, and I really would love to hear any comments, questions. On the Alliance for Sustainability, we have a weekly newsletter. In our last weekly newsletter, in this weekly newsletter, we are featuring, just came out today, and you can see it on our Alliance for Sustainability website. We're featuring a great hour and 20-minute video by some of our local leaders on climate justice and climate equity. And they were talking in such a powerful way about how we teach our children and how upset they are by their kids learning in school about natural resources that we exploit instead of hold in a reverent way. And that really struck me about how powerful our schools and our brainwashing systems are, our socialization systems, that if we really want to see this as a living world, that we have to see it in a different way. So open up to any comments and questions that people might have.
Have you come across any day school curricula that are reframing according to these Jewish ethics?
I think that there's some great ones that some of my favorite rabbis have come up with, from Reconstructionist, Jewish Renewal, but also Reform and Conservative have done. And there's a great Orthodox environmental group that has some great stuff with curriculum. And I think most of that is still on the COJL, the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life website. I think all of that, we used to house everybody's stuff there. And that's COJL, C-O-E-J-L. And once upon a time, I was a founding board member, and we were sort of the major Jewish umbrella environmental group. It's sort of trying to reclaim itself now, but we really held all of that kind of information. Any other questions, comments? And I can't see everybody because of the way the screen is, but please feel free to speak up.
Well, I have something to ask or offer, but I'll wait for others. If nobody else. Okay, I'll offer it this way. Julie might have something to say about this. The intellectual part of things. We're often very ignorant about the consequences of our actions, and we don't have omniscient understanding of very simple things like the impact of plastic on the environment, or the kind of clothes that we buy and the processes that were used to create those. We might be well-intentioned, but we lack the education. Now, this ties in with preschool, but at the preschool level, we're not going to be able to teach all of the scientific ins and outs in great detail. So that of the four worlds that Julie talked about, the intellectual world seems to me right now to be a particular challenge, even for those who are committed to sustainability.
And what I would just say, Brian, in the generic field of sustainability, at the Alliance for Sustainability, we have always felt that actually the technological challenges are not very difficult, that we can come up with those, but it's the people side about how we get people to be open and to change and to be open to transformation. That's a lot more challenging. And I think my experience is, and one of the reasons I've always liked working with different faith traditions, is that often I will have a business leader who will not talk to me. Now they all talk to me, but in the old days, they wouldn't talk to me about sustainability. But if I went to their congregation and I spoke about their traditions and what their traditions taught, it was stunning what would happen. Because instead of it coming from the head, it came from the heart. And it was really quite profound. I've had people like, for example, I led a training for the Basilica of St. Mary in downtown Minneapolis for both their board and then for all of the staff on sustainability. And there was this one guy, a business leader, who after it was all over, I said, how was this for you? And because he was sort of down, and people usually aren't down, they're usually inspired. And I said, what's up? And I was assuming it was I didn't like this, what you said was terrible and that kind of thing. And what he said is, I realized that my entire business is destroying the planet and is not aligned with my Catholic teachings. He was despondent. He was struggling. He had to think, what am I going to do with this business that isn't okay? It's not aligned with the teachings that I believe in. And that's often the place where I find I can reach people that oftentimes I can't reach on other levels. Even if I can show them I can save them money, which I always do. But for some, they're too busy, Any other questions on this part?
I think that makes sense what you said, Terry, about kind of reaching people on a spiritual level. It's kind of causing them to go higher and be reflective about things, as opposed to just being totally enmeshed in the day-to-day process. The other thing that struck me as you and Brian were talking about is how, and reading these things, how divorced we have become from the land and the cycles of life. We pick things up at a supermarket that, start off halfway around the world. And I mean, there's been some pluses and minuses about that, but we're not tied to the land anymore. And, we don't necessarily grow things directly or deal with livestock or anything. We're so separated from it, and we've become alienated and estranged from it. It's almost like we're separated from the earthly cycles.
Beautifully said, Bob, and very tragic. We're going to discover in just a minute, we're going to go into this, that we were totally tied to the land. We were land stewards. We got it. We knew how our lives were so, and in fact, we'll talk about some of the holidays and how they're totally connected. But then over time, given discrimination, Jews not being allowed to own land, we really became divorced. We became city people in many cases, not everywhere. But you're absolutely right. And I think there's a whole reclaiming movement going on in Judaism of connecting back to the earth. And I just think it's really exciting and powerful. So thanks for bringing that up. So let's go on to Yishuv Haaretz and Yishuv Ha'olam. So we talked about the negative commands about do not destroy, but we also have positive commands about settling the land, where we're balancing the environment and human survival. So we have a great teaching that we are forbidden to live in a city that doesn't have a garden or greenery. A Torah scholar should not live in a city without a ascetic fund to sustain the needy, a synagogue, a public bath, sewage disposal, and an elementary school. Pretty practical, not really messing around with what we've got to deal with. Oops, sorry. Things are sticking here with the humidity. Let me just get that back up. I love this quote by Jonathan Helfand, and to me, it really summarizes a lot of Judaism's thinking. Jewish laws do not offer unquestioning protection to the natural environment, nor do they offer an immutable schedule of priorities to guide the actions of humans. So, okay, it's not protecting everything, and it doesn't tell us every single thing that we need to do. But they do enunciate an important legal and moral principle. And to me, this is so huge, so huge. The environment, like human beings, has certain unalienable rights. The environment has certain unalienable rights, and these rights are endowed to it by the Creator, not by us. This is not a human decision. And that's really important. We don't get to make that decision. And as a result, they may not be summarily dismissed or violated. It is the obligation of society to respect and protect these rights with the same procedures, institutions, and legislative initiatives that are employed to guarantee and protect the rights of humans. Can you believe that? I mean, what a statement that the environment, this creation, gets to be protected with the same procedures, institutions, and legislation that we use to guarantee and protect the rights of humans. I mean, that's just huge. And then maybe one last thing in this part, the Hasids, I've always loved this, sum up the importance of, quite simply, planting is so important that if a sapling were in your hand and you were told that the Mashiach had come, first plant the sapling, then go out to greet the Mashiach. I've always loved that. Any questions about that or comments? Then let's go on to another one of my favorite things.
I would like you to just say one thing, Terry.
Yeah.
In terms of rights, duty is the other side of the coin. We saw this with leaving the gleanings of the field for the poor. Why? Because you have a duty to do this. Why should they get it? Why should they be able to pick up the gleanings? Because they have a right to it. So duty is another side to the rights equation.
Nice.
If we only focus on rights, it's more of a modern concept. And
Yeah.
It's missing something.
Beautiful, Brian. I love that. Thank you.
And also love. Just
nice.
I
love it.
I thought you might have something to offer in terms of kind of integrating that with the idea of rights. Rights seems so legal and cold to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I play with this all the time. As many of you know very well, I come from a heart place and I'm deeply spiritual. And that works with many, many people. And it's my essence. And especially after my near-death experiences, for sure. On the other hand, I work in the world of business and government. And, I think many of the people in business and government have huge hearts. And I think we need to change towards more of a love economy. So I'm very clear about that. But how open and accepting people are of that and that terminology, that's an interesting question. And I'm trying to bring both groups together. We need to do both, I think, as quickly as possible. And for some, it's definitely talking about love, and for some, it's definitely talking about rights, because so many rights have been violated on so many different levels that's a language that many people use, and especially after you've experienced trauma. It's like, how can you talk about much if you don't have a right to breathe, to live, to whatever. But I appreciate that, and I think we do need to hold both at the same time. And yeah, good. So let's
Terry, there's
Yes,
another
Julie.
person, with their hand up, another Brian on the call.
Yeah, and I can't see people's hands, so speak up, Brian.
Thank you. I suppose this is from the heart and somewhat mystical, but as the moment where I'm sharing this piece with Jonathan Helfand and Terry and the other comments, I'm looking on my wall of a photograph that was bought by the American Bar Association, and it was used to highlight the article, "Do Trees Have Rights?" And this goes back to my days in Hyde Park in Chicago, where the editor for the magazine saw this, inspired him, and published it for this. So it's just an experience that I hadn't thought about, even though this picture's been on my wall for decades.
Beautiful. Thank you. Brian, I just got to tell you, when you were up close like that, I was thinking I was talking to the Dalai Lama with the red on and the head. And it's like, I was going, all right, keep talking. I have nothing more to say.
I could, but I don't want to say anymore.
So let's talk about cycles and holy days. And this again is just really cool stuff. So, in Ecclesiastes, we're talking there to everything, there's a season and a time. But this next one is one I have no idea why other people don't always highlight, but it's really one of my favorite passages. The sun also arises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns about to the north. It whirls about continuously, and the wind returns again according to its circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place where the rivers come, they return again. The thing that has been, it is what shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. Unbelievable statement by our ancestors who did not have PhDs in science and ecology and interconnection of all of these things, but they totally got it. And I just think it's so amazing that this is so specific, and this holistic and interconnected view by our ancestors is just an amazing thing. So I love that. Arthur Waskow wrote a book. Arthur is a dear friend, amazing human being, has just done so much on so many different levels. One of my very, very favorite books, not only that he's written, but I've ever read, is Seasons of Our Joy. And if you've never read it, I highly, highly encourage you to read it. He talks about each and every one of the Jewish holy days and does it in a way that has always blown my mind, everything from ancient teachings to new understandings. So I I love that. And one of the things that he points out, which I love, is that Judaism is based on cycles of life that interweave with the cycles of nature. We celebrate in Judaism both the cycles of the sun and the cycles of the moon. Unlike Muslims that are basing their calendar on the sun, we do the sun and the moon. And so we end up with 4 pilgrim festivals that coincided with 4 seasons. Pesach, Sherry, you're going to admit her? Great. Pesach, Passover, near the spring equinox, which brings the emergence of flowers and ripening of barley. Shavuot, which is close to the summer solstice, at the onset of nature's abundance and the first wheat harvest. Then Sukkot, the feast of the huts near the fall equinox, after the harvest in the fall. And then here's the more interesting one, Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly. Most of us don't know much, if anything, about it. It's the far less known celebrated festival occurring just at the end of Sukkot. And it celebrates the onset of the first rains and winter. What I want to point out, according to Waskow, is it was not originally tacked on there. It was originally meant to be like January. And the reason it was tacked on is that is when the rains come. And you couldn't do a pilgrim festival because you couldn't get your animals to be brought, for the sacrifice through that mud or your wagons or anything. So they tacked it on. But what's really interesting, and Waskow points this out, is that there is a basic belief that originally the entire purpose of Yom Kippur was to atone to God and to people. But the purpose of that atonement is so that the rains would come at Shemini Atzeret, because all life depended on those rains in Israel. So really quite profound, and I love that. And this is one of my favorite things that I love asking people, how many New Years do we have in Judaism? We have 4, and 95 to 99% of Jews do not know that. We have 4 New Years in Judaism. So we've got what we know, Rosh Hashanah and Passover. They are 6 months apart. But there are 2 lesser known New Years, one for the trees and one for animals. So many of you do know about Tu B'Shvat, the New Year for the trees. It had a pretty significant but boring purpose originally, and that was the time for taking the tithe, 1/10 of your harvest from the trees. And the reason they picked that time in January or early February is that there wasn't fruit on the trees in most cases, so that they could get a good accounting for what your 1/10 tithe would be for the priests. And so pretty boring, that's tax day for the trees. And then it was expanded by the Kabbalists into this incredible mystical Seder meal where we celebrate the tree of life. And let's see if I can just get my screen back here. So where's my, oh, here. So there's my tree of life, designed by Jackie Allnut. So thank you, Jackie, for that beautiful design. But the Kabbalists had a very different perspective. The Kabbalists actually had, for Tu B'Shvat, an inverted tree. So the tree's branches were actually reaching down to us in a really powerful way. And our eating those different fruits, nuts, the 4 different types, well, we only get to eat 3, played a key role in allowing the divine flow of energy in the universe to take place. In other words, they believed that human beings played an essential role in the ongoing energy field of creation, which I think is really wonderful. So there are still mystical Tu B'Shvat Seders that are going on. And in the 20th century, it became celebrated in Israel as Arbor Day. And in Israel, children get the day off from school to go out and plant trees. And that became Jewish Earth Day around the world, and a time for families and congregations to really experience a spiritual and eco-educational Tu B'Shvat Seder. And then the last one that I want to open up for any comments, questions, is Rosh Hashanah La Behomot, the New Year for Animals. And this is a very interesting one. It was originally specified in the Mishnah as the tax tithing time for animals. And the reason it takes place in August is few animals are born in August, so they can have a good census of animals. And it coincides with Rosh Chodesh Elul, the new moon for the month of Elul, 1 month before Rosh Hashanah. And since 2009, it's been revived by Jewish animal protection advocates to raise awareness about Jewish laws requiring the humane treatment of animals. So open up to any comments or questions about any of those. And again, just speak up because I can't see everybody with my screen. Does that all make sense? Things you're wondering about? Any ahas? Then, if none, let me know if there are. If none, I'm just going to keep moving on because there's more I would love to cover. The Sabbath.
Yeah, Terry, I just want to say how fantastic this is. It's really inspiring. So just want to share that so my silence doesn't seem like it's disinterest. And I know I'm not alone in that.
Thank you, Julie. That means a lot. I'm really glad. It makes me really happy. So the Sabbath. Now, I am the Sabbath breaker growing up. I did not observe a Sabbath, and I actually thought it was a rather stupid idea. And it really didn't make much sense to me. Why wouldn't we get to do all the things we normally get to do? And I want to just acknowledge Rabbi Irv Weiss, who was originally not from Cincinnati and then was here at Hillel. Many of you have experienced Irv. He every year throughout the year would talk about the importance of the Sabbath. And finally, when I was, after 5 years of listening to him, on a Yom Kippur morning, and he was extolling the Sabbath again. And he would say, if there's one thing that you do in Judaism, observe the Sabbath. If that's the one thing you do, that's the one. And finally, I guess because I was hungry, I gave in. And I will admit, it was the second hardest thing that I have ever done. The hardest thing I ever did was to meditate. The first time I tried meditating, I sat there for 2 minutes and I started hyperventilating. And I literally thought I was going to die. It was so hard to quiet my mind. And the Sabbath to me almost felt the same way, except it was for a longer period of time. All these rules and things you couldn't do and all this stuff. But thanks to Irv and his wife, Kathy, and Jackie and Leanne Olnick, and all kinds of other people, I began to understand what the Sabbath was. But it still was difficult. And finally, I was speaking at a Jewish environmental conference in Colorado, and I got a little bit bored, which I never do. And I said, I'm going to take a walk. And I went out, and right outside in the vestibule, or wherever you want to call it, in the lobby, there was a long table of books. And there's one woman behind the table of books. And I was feeling very, very smart alecky. And I said to her, is there one book on this table that if I read it, it would change my life. And I said, oh, and it has to be short. And she smiled and she walked over and she picked up a book by Abraham Joshua Heschel called The Sabbath. And I literally sat down, I read the entire book, and it changed my life 180 degrees. And I began to relish the Sabbath. So I've come a long way with the Sabbath. And what I love about the Sabbath is it is a unique Jewish creation. And it's unlike any other festivals because it is tied to time, a 7-day cycle. And it celebrates two things. One is creation, and the other is our escape from slavery in the Exodus from Egypt. So it celebrates creation, that's amazing. And at the same time, it celebrates freedom and liberation. And when we were in that desert, we did not have food to eat. And God gave us this gift of manna, the miracle bread from heaven that allowed us, that sustained us in the desert for 40 years. And what I think is so cool is that each person could go out and gather manna, but only enough for them and for their family. And if they gathered more, it would spoil and be rotten. And so no manna could be accumulated, and no one could control the supply of the food. So there could be no markets for profit. And I believe that this was one of the greatest times in the history of the world, because it's the one time that everybody had enough to eat and no one had too much or too little.
Oh.
And so we celebrate that.
Question about that?
Yeah, one last little thing.
Okay.
We celebrate that each Shabbat when we have our challah. And it is representing that time. And most Jews do not understand that, do not understand the deep significance of what we are doing when we're getting to enjoy that bread that God gave us. Yeah, was that Lori?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I really appreciate what you talked about as far as the manna. However, my question is, we weren't that happy about it and we complained.
No,
And
we
so,
were complainers.
yeah, well, we are complainers. But how does it
Yes.
tie into this whole concept of Judaism and the environment? And
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. That's such a great question. And it's a question, as you know, I've brought up many, 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 many times in our Torah study at Temple Israel on Saturday mornings. It's a challenge. Yes, we were complaining. We loved that meat, and God gave us so much we couldn't get it out of our teeth. We were besieged with it. You know, those days of slavery. So how does that relate to all of this? Well, I would say that we were slaves and we had a slave mentality. And I think, I'm going to be blunt, I think most of us are still slaves. We're consumer slaves. We're slaves to all kinds of things, ways of doing, ways of thinking, whether it's racism or sexism or ageism or whatever kinds of things. We are addicted consumers. We have this disease called affluenza, consuming the planet to death. So why I love this is it's this opportunity to look, am I free? Are we free? Are we free of all of these things that we've been brainwashed with to consume and to profit and to control and to dominate, which I think have been around for a long time. So yes, we were complainers and many of us are complainers. And I think that we need to help heal those wounds. We had trauma. We had serious, big time trauma. And we now know that that trauma is passed on intergenerationally. And so I try to have a lot of empathy about that kind of complaining, and try to help heal it. Because underneath that, if you look at the work of nonviolent communications, and work that I do with an amazing leader, Dr. Yvette Erasmus, here in the Twin Cities, you know, underneath those feelings, those grumblings, are unmet needs, unmet fundamental needs that we have. And we really need to look at how do we meet everyone's unmet fundamental needs. So I don't know if that gets at that, Lori, but I feel that a lot of our work at the Alliance for Sustainability isn't about, you know, something organic or green or, you know, saving energy. That's all good. We believe in it. We do it. We show, you know, all of that stuff. But the harder one is, how do we heal? And we all have wounds, and most of us have some pretty deep wounds. And we really need, as Martin Luther King talked about, none of us can be healthy until all of us can be healthy. You can get a checkup at the Mayo Clinic, but that is not going to be enough to heal the wounds in our society. So I feel that very much part of sustainability is doing that healing work. And that's why I also, you know, just giving another pitch for Julie's work with Musar, there's a lot of that kind of deep healing that takes place within Musar, about loving ourselves, about accepting ourselves. And I think we especially, we as Jews, need to do more of that. So I don't know, does that go anywhere with you, Lori? Did that even answer your question?
It did answer for as much as you can answer the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I can add to that some is my grandparents were very observant for the Sabbath, and they were lucky that they were able to own land. And they said it wasn't, they felt a connection to the earth through the Sabbath, because it wasn't just a day of rest for the humans. It was a day of rest for the land and the animals as well. And if you think about what the equivalent of that is nowadays, it's maybe not driving all over the place. Okay, maybe to synagogue or something fun, but you know, not to work, not expending as much energy, taking time for families. You're probably reducing your carbon footprint that day.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for the Sabbath and how it ties us to the earth. But you have to stop thinking of it as only for the humans to rest. You have to understand this is for everything, for more than the human world.
And I so appreciate that, Sia. That's beautiful. We're going to go right into that right now. But one more thing, just to add, how fortunate your family was to have that tie to the land. And I know that for many inner city kids, how transformational it is when they actually get to be in nature and experience that. And, you know, I think human beings have that kind of deep need to have that kind of connection. So thank you. Let's go on to what, first a comment from Mordecai Liebling, dear friend, phenomenal rabbi, great leader in all kinds of areas with social justice. Through Sabbath rest, we have the opportunity to appreciate creation and freedom from all forms of slavery. And Mordecai noted, quote, the Sabbath is the paradigm for the Jewish relationship to the environment, spiritually, socially, and environmentally. So beautiful. And to me, it's the paradigm for sustainability. It's like so great that we get every week to have a Jewish Earth Day, where we're celebrating sustainability in all of its different forms. And you know, you all know, I mean, the Sabbath is the time we make love, that we get to be connected, and we have the best food, and the nicest clothes and the nicest spices, and we make things beautiful. And so what a great, Heschel talks about, if you want a taste of the afterlife, observe the Sabbath. And he says the Sabbath is 1/64 of what the afterlife is. And then in his book, The Sabbath, I love this quote. And Julie, you could do a whole thing just about this. To set apart one day a week for freedom, a day on which we would not use the instruments which have been so easily turned into weapons of destruction, a day for being with ourselves, a day of detachment from the vulgar, of independence of external obligation, a day in which we stop worshiping the idols of technical civilization, a day in which we use no money. I just got chills as I was reading that. Is there any institution that holds out a greater hope for human progress than the Sabbath? And then I just say, it's God's greatest gift, an example of sustainability. So any more comments before we go on to sabbatical year in our last 9 minutes?
Real quick, just that when you
Sure.
mentioned that,
Yeah,
there's this book that 12 different Musar groups used in the Twin Cities this year called Changing the World from the Inside Out. And it's a Jewish approach to personal and social change. And the last chapter is on Shabbat.
beautiful. Where do we get it, Julie?
You can get this on Amazon or any, I don't know, sorry if that's not the right company, Barnes and
No,
Noble
that's all right.
or your favorite bookseller. I'll just say that. It's Rabbi David Jaffe, and I'll put
Oh,
the
that's
title.
David's. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I'll put the title in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great, Julie. Thanks. Thanks for mentioning that. That's great. So let's go on to the sabbatical year, Shemitah. So the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land. So here we go. We're going totally environmental. And as Sia was talking about, caring for the earth, caring for the animals, no sowing, pruning, reaping, or gathering. And then it not only prescribes healing the land, and letting it lie fallow, but it requires the owner to let the land provide food for the poor of your people. And it goes even further and calls for the cancellation or remission of all debts at the end of every 7th year. In other words, it is a basic human right to have regularly a fresh chance to succeed without being forever weighed down by the past. At the same time, it requires tithing and other acts so that the disadvantaged not be neglected in the time between the Sabbaths. And the purpose of these provisions might be understood as redistribution of accumulated wealth so that more widespread sharing and greater human equality would result. And then we move on to Yovel, Jubilee year. The concept specifies that after 7 Sabbaths, humans should hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land. And ye shall return every person to their possession. The Torah acknowledges the notion of ancestral land and requires that anyone who had to sell or give up their land for any reason can take the land back without cost. And it forbids taking land permanently from those who originally owned and worked it, and permits them to take it back sooner than 50 years through proper payment. Pretty profound. Now, here's the deal. According to eminent Jewish scholars, the sabbatical and Jubilee years represent a unique Israelite attempt to combat the social evils that had infected Israelite society and a return to the idyllic period of the Desert Union, when social equality and fraternal concern had prevailed. A similar balance of controls can be found in Isaiah, which forbids the concentration of large blocks of land in a few hands. Unfortunately, this Jubilee year was what it appears to be not fully have been followed. But the concept is certainly there. So any questions on that before we go on to 2 last concepts I think we'll squeeze in?
Well, one thing that struck me, Terry, was the change in Jewish practice from being maybe more nomadic, like the story of wandering through the wilderness, to being more of a domesticated people. and trying to kind of recapture what it was like when they didn't necessarily own land, but things were maybe more held in common.
Yeah, great point, Bob. And, you know, and I think there's a lot to be said about the whole kibbutz movement, you know, in Israel. And I think there's some of that embedded in that. So let's go on, and we'll just finish the paper with Tsar Ba'alei Hayim, suffering of living creatures, the law in Judaism that bans unnecessary suffering of animals. It is a Talmudic requirement that stems from the biblical law requiring people to assist in unloading heavy burdens from animals. So according to Jewish tradition, the prohibition against inhumane conduct against animals is one of the 7 commandments given to the sons of Noah. So this is a big deal. Therefore, it is binding on all humanity, the Noahide laws. Animals are to share the Sabbath rest with humans, as Sia pointed out, and although no work is permitted on the Sabbath, exceptions are made if the purpose is to relieve the suffering of an animal. In fact, kindness to animals is one of the few virtues that the Jewish tradition specifically associates with the promise of heavenly reward. Pretty big deal. I love this in Ecclesiastes, where it says, "For that with which befalleth the sons of men befalleth the beasts, even one thing befalleth them. As one dieth, so dieth the other. Yea, they have all one breath, so that a man hath no preeminence above a beast." In fact, the Torah not only calls for the respect of all living things, but requires humans to learn from all of their life. God spoke to Job and commanded, "But ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee, and the fowls of the air, and they shall teach thee, or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee." So any question just on that humane concept? Then let's go on to the last, which is the concept of kashrut and eco-kashrut. One of my favorite topics, but we'll just touch on it briefly. The first reference to what later in the Torah become the laws of kashrut are in Exodus 22:30. "And ye shall be holy people unto me, therefore ye shall not eat any flesh that is torn of the beasts of the field." It establishes the clear purpose and goal of kosher laws as holiness, not health. And I just really want to underscore that. In almost every case where there is a law of kashrut, God will say something like, "Be holy because I am holy." It is always tied to holiness. So it begs this question: what does it mean to live a holy life? And many Jews have sought to answer this by examining a range of ancient Jewish teachings, like kashrut, caring for the earth, respecting animals, protecting one's own body, not oppressing workers and customers, the sharing of food, money, and work time with the poor, eating consciously, and the Sabbath and Jubilee years of rest for the land, and from the deliberate economic use of it. These teachings were incorporated by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who is the founder of Jewish Renewal, into the concept of eco-kosher. And I'm really proud of the Jewish Renewal movement and the thinking of Reb Zalman and Arthur Waskow and Arthur Green and some of our other great rabbis who've contributed to the thinking around eco-kosher. It's a range of practices to properly respect the earth, ourselves, and all other life. And famously, Reb Zalman doesn't tell us what eco-kosher is, but he asks questions. And for example, are grapes that have been grown by exploiting farm workers and spraying hazardous pesticides kosher to eat at a synagogue wedding reception? Is a Jewish newspaper made by chopping down ancient forest kosher? Is it kosher to use toxic cleaning products and pesticides in the synagogue? Is it kosher to have retirement funds invested in companies that utilize child and sweatshop labor? And by the way, a lot of the sweatshops in LA are owned by Jews. And when we have tried to address those conditions, they, in many cases, have cut off funding for their main Jewish institutions. Is it kosher to use inefficient incandescent light bulbs that cause more polluting coal burning? How about driving an SUV? And I really want to acknowledge Reb Arthur Waskow and his Shalom Center, who further developed the concept through the Eco Kosher Project. And that was one of the papers that you have. So we are at 8:31. I'm sorry to have gone over, but I really hope that these ancient and contemporary teachings do provide a really profound guide or green print for how we can live in a way that brings about tikkun olam, protects our environment, and creates a world of sustainability. And I think they invite, even require us to co-create a healthy future for ourselves, our children, and future generations of all of creation. And hopefully we will all awaken and respond. And I really feel God is counting on us. So I'm happy to stay on longer, happy to answer any questions and hear any comments that any of you may have. I think I'm going to stop my screen sharing so I can see you all fully again. I like seeing your faces. So any comments? Hi, Pat, welcome. I saw you when you came in. In fact, I let you in. No, we can't hear you. You got your mute on.
Thank you very much. It was really full, chock full of information. I loved it. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. So great that you could join us. So thank you so much. Wonderful being with you. Other comments, questions? One thing I will just add, we didn't get a chance to talk about the talk that I gave at, where was it, at Bethel. I got to be the scholar in residence for a weekend. And then I gave a similar talk, I modified it for, oh, I've got all these names bouncing around. What's our reconstructionist? I'm just not thinking.
Mayim Rabim.
Yeah, Mayim Rabim. So you've got that paper included, and it addresses really this whole concept of eco-kashrut. What does that really mean? If you want to go more detailed into that, we talked about it a lot in our last book club meeting from Reb Zalman's perspective, which I thought was really helpful to hear. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Is this helpful? Is this, are you stuck on something?
I was wondering, Terry, have you been involved with Alepht's new program about Earth consciousness? Because they really would benefit from having your involvement. And in fact, I just forwarded some of your information to someone in their 20s who's coming up now in this generation of eco-consciousness. And I want them to know about you and learn from you.
Well, I appreciate that, Julie. That's very kind. I will say this, there are some really great rabbis that are involved that I love, that I think are doing a great job. But we have a, like in the world of academics, as Bob can attest, there is a PhD mentality. You don't have a PhD, you really shouldn't be saying much of anything. And you certainly shouldn't be a professor or teaching. The same thing exists in Judaism, that I feel very fortunate that I've gotten to speak at as many synagogues around the country as I have without being a rabbi. But I have noticed it's very rabbinic centric. And so either you are one of those great rabbinic scholars, and I think you can relate to that because a lot of the world of Musar has been dominated in the same way, especially by white males. And, you know, that's too bad. I think it's been their loss. And that's one of the main reasons I feel that your voice is so important to be heard.
Ditto. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any thoughts about, okay, now you've heard this, any thoughts about potential next steps for you, or where there might be a challenge, or like, well, how would I even begin talking about it? Like whether it's a school curriculum or in my congregation, adult learning, in our social action, climate work, whatever. Any thoughts, questions, or just in your personal life where you run into challenges or barriers?
Well, I wanted to share, I have taken on the mitzvah of keeping more of Shabbos than I had before. Not keeping the whole Shabbat, but keeping way more than I had between lights and cooking and all that kind of stuff. And I'm finding, even though I didn't say I wouldn't drive, I'm finding I don't want to. I mean, I want to keep more of Shabbos than less. And so it's very interesting because I a number of years ago gave up TV and noise, electricity that way. But I didn't give up cooking. And so it's not even giving up, it's keeping. I'm seeing it as keeping. And I'm sort of resenting now when things are being held on Shabbos that require me to drive.
I love that, Pat. And I if I weren't driving my kids around to go to,
Yeah.
some event or something like that, I totally feel the same way. And it's why, I mean, COVID has been horrific. And at the same time, it has allowed us not to be running around crazy. And, we have a cleaner planet. Birds came back, all kinds of things, fish, all kinds of things came back without our presence all over the place. So you're right. And I noticed that when I started meditating, and I noticed when I started observing the Sabbath, how so much more came to me on an intuitive level, because I wasn't so busy and clogged. And, there, like you say, there are amazing gifts that are waiting there for us. It seems like we're giving up. I thought we were giving up. I didn't even think it would be possible. I'm an environmentalist. I'm saving the planet 24/7. And I realized I was burning myself up. Not sustainable.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. Thank you for the affirmation that I just got from listening
I think
to you.
it's great, Pat. I think that's really great. You're noticing that. I think it'd be great for you to share, even more, write about it, let other people hear about that. And I think more people will be drawn to it. There's this one great Sabbath story I shared. Sherry was on a talk I gave for a great group. Speaking of the Sabbath, there's a great group you guys might like called Green Sabbath. And they have a phenomenal person on this Friday that's going to be speaking. Oh God, no, I'm not remembering her name. But every week they have people from different spiritual traditions talking about the Sabbath. It is so cool. And they talk about those very kinds of things. And it's very cool. But the story I wanted to just share with all of you, because you brought that up, Pat, is the story that there was once a lumberjack and a woman, this big, strong guy who was big lumberjack, and this woman, and they were going to have a contest to see who could cut the most wood in 8 hours. And so they separated the two. They had a divider. This guy is so strong, he never stops. He cuts wood for 8 hours. The woman is stopping every hour. And at the end of the time, they look to see who's chopped the most wood. And it's the woman. And the guy was incredulous. He said, that's just not possible. I was chopping the whole time. You stopped every hour.
I love it.
How is that possible? She said, simple. I sharpened my axe. And that's really the gift of the Sabbath. God is like us. God is just begging us to just stop. I stopped. I'm God. I stopped. Why can't you guys stop? So that was really, that helped frame it for me, that I'm not giving up anything. I'm actually getting what I need to keep me going through the week, which is amazing, I think. So very cool.
And
Other
Terry, I
questions?
had actually sort of a policy question, maybe at the macro level. Norman Borlaug, of course, was at the University of Minnesota and was the father of the so-called Green Revolution, that's given credit for saving a lot of people in terms of feeding so many more people, but also through more intensive practices. So how do we balance the need to feed so many people on less and less land with sustainable practices?
One of my favorite questions in the world, Bob. I'm going to give you two different answers. The very first time I went to the University of Minnesota, I had literally just finished traveling around the world to 45 countries. Bye, Julie. To 45 different countries. And I saw firsthand how these incredible organic farmers all over the world were out yielding conventional green revolution farmers, whether it was corn, rice, whatever it might have been, but especially rice, using organic methods, not having bird die-offs, not having health problems, not polluting their water. And I went to a symposium on the St. Paul campus at the U of M with 4 of the leading ag scientists. And they were saying all kinds of things about the Green Revolution. It was about sustainability. They were starting to talk about it. This was way back in 1981. And they were starting to talk about it, but they were saying lies, literal lies, just total untruths. And I stood up and I said, well, I just really want you to understand, I have just finished traveling around the world to 45 countries, and what you're saying isn't true. And I went point by point of all the things that they said. And I documented how many problems there are with the Green Revolution. Serious problems. And many people would argue that the Green Revolution has caused as much hunger as it has ended, if not more, because of the social injustice that's built into that system. 10 years later, one of those professors confided in me. And he said, that was the scariest moment of my entire career. I realized I was wrong and I didn't know what I was talking about. And, now we have a whole sustainable ag program at the U of M doing great work. Some really exciting things, whole groups of students doing great stuff in this whole field. It's really remarkable. But my answer, the second answer I'm going to give you is that the top ag economist at the U of M, oh God, now I'm not, his daughter was an intern of ours at the Alliance, studying spiders. And by the way, the problem with pesticides is they kill all of the beneficials that we need to control pests. And so that's what she was studying. But her dad was a famous Norm Rutan. Do you remember Vern Rutan? Do you remember him? He was really a famous guy. He was one of the biggest Green Revolution advocates, on par with what's his name?
Orlog.
Yeah, with Borlaug, on par. And they were colleagues. They worked together. But his focus was on rice. And I was on a radio program once with him, the U of M's channel that they had, and he was extolling how great the Green Revolution was, and telling it's all this and all that. And I said, I just want to share a different perspective. And I said, can you give me one example where the Green Revolution has ended hunger? Just any example. You can pick the country, you can pick the cropping system. And he happened to pick the Philippines, which he knows, but I also happen to know. And I literally went down the list of how there's so much more poverty now in the Philippines, and how they have these crops that the farmers can't reproduce. They don't have the diversity of crops. They have more disease. It goes, and the costs for all of the pesticides and the fertilizers and the water control and all of these things. And he couldn't say a thing. And I can show example after example where it's extolled as the great, wonderful solution. And it's really not. And the UN has come to that conclusion. I mean, in 1992 at the UN Earth Summit, we got the UN Food and Agriculture Organization to adopt sustainable agriculture as its goal. And all 179 countries attending the UN Earth Summit adopted sustainable agriculture as their goal. So I really think that it still exists, you know, and now we've got GMOs and, oh, they're the wonder solution. And, you know, we have all these kinds of things. But I really think that from a climate change perspective and from so many other perspectives, including farmers' income and hunger, that we can way out produce. You know, we may not get the same yields, but most farmers have integrated cropping systems, which you can't do with Green Revolution. You've got row crops, you know, and that's the challenge. And farmers don't farm that way. Poor farmers don't farm that way. They have many, many crops intermixed. So, and here's the big thing. They far out yield per acre, the total amount, far out yield conventional agriculture. But for one crop like corn, you know, rice, soybeans, you may out yield. But when you look at the total piece of land, they don't. And they don't poison the farmers either, or the birds, or wildlife. So yeah, that would be my long answer.
Thanks for your answer, Terry.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? I love the image of Patty. It looks like she's asleep. She's in bliss land, and if I send her into bliss land, I'm really happy. Any other last comments? Thoughts? Well, again, I want to come back and acknowledge Sherry for bringing us all together, getting out the notices, handling all of the invites, to each of you for taking time to be together. It's really special. And, you know, I'll just be honest and say it really means a lot on this very sacred day. Pat, you didn't hear this, but at 6 o'clock tonight, 21 years ago, I nearly died. And I had a near-death experience from the toothpick that I had swallowed. And so I began by talking about that. So it just brings a lot of meaning to me to be with people that I really care about and who care about each other and about the planet. So thanks for taking the time and being part of this. And if I can help or support you in any way, I would love to do that on this
Thank you, Terry.
journey that we're all on.
Terry, I remember that. I remember praying for you for that toothpick.
Thank you.
So I was part of your life back then. Yeah.
I remember that quite well.
Well,
Yes.
Thank you, Terry.
felt-
We're certainly glad you're doing well now. And this was quite a remarkable, comprehensive overview on the topic. And
Wow.
to have it from you as, you know, such an expert with us is wonderful. So I
You're very
appreciate
kind,
it very
Sherry.
much. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
All right. Well, you all
Well, now
have
I'm
a
going to
good
take care of my other stewardship responsibility, my children.